This is part 6 of the significance of Playgirl magazine and The Shining. I'm going to continue my analysis where I left off in part 5. Just to give you a heads up, I'm going to be zipping through these slides a bit quickly, so get ready for the pause button if you want to focus on something. I think it's pretty clear what the routine here is by this time, and if you've been following these videos, I don't think it's really necessary for me to belabor certain points about how things are done here or what's going on. So that's just to give you a bit of a heads up. Also, one thing I want to make clear here is that this particular video is very closely related to the content that was covered in parts 1 and 2 of Frank Lloyd Wright and the Taliesin Massacre and Kubrick's The Shining. And I think it's very important that you're familiar with those two videos so you can fully appreciate the content in this video. So if you haven't seen those two videos, then I highly recommend you go back and watch them and then proceed to this video here. But just to quickly summarize those two video installments, in this cold room scene here, Kubrick uses the Dick Halloran character to point us to page 193 in Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography. And from that page, page 193, two messages were decoded, and those two messages are going to play an important part in this video series here. So that's the connection that I'm talking about. And so with that, let me get started here with this video installment. Recall from parts 1 through 5 of this video series that a series of messages were decoded from Stanley Kubrick and his wife and daughter Christiane and Vivian Kubrick. And these messages were decoded from two letters in the letter section on page 10 of the issue of Playgirl magazine. We see Jack Torrance reading in the lobby of the Overlook Hotel, which was the January 1978 edition. And as you can see here, Stanley Kubrick, I claim, wrote that Beneath My Yurt letter outlined in red, and Christiane and Vivian wrote the Mazer Maven letter, which I've highlighted there in green. And again, you can go back and review parts 1 through 5 of the significance of Playgirl magazine and The Shining. And what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you the messages which we've decoded so far, and each one of the messages is labeled with the video series or the video from which it was derived. So this is just here to quickly refresh your memory. Now, one of the important takeaways, I think, from part number 5 of this video series is that Stanley Kubrick wasn't the only one contributing letters to this page in Playgirl. He wasn't the only one associated with The Shining who was getting in on the act here. And so I think it's with that, it's natural to look at other letters in the letter section in this particular issue of Playgirl with the idea of, well, perhaps there are more letters with messages to be decoded. And with that, I want to draw your attention to the letter there that I've outlined in blue. When you're scanning these letters here with the idea of trying to determine if any of them were written by somebody associated with The Shining, then what I find striking about this letter here outlined in blue is the name Chapman. And the fact is that word there is phonetically very similar to the name Scatman, as in Scatman Crothers, the actor who played Dick Halloran in The Shining. Now, as you can see from this letter, when you look at it closely, it does not begin on page 10. It begins on page 8, as I've shown you here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch together this letter. I'm going to take the beginning part from page 8 and I'm going to attach it to the rest of it that we see on page 10. And as you can see, that's what I've done here. So now the task at hand here is to analyze this letter and try and figure out what's going on the assumption that this was written by Scatman Crothers and he has included a hidden message here. And when you analyze this letter, you noticed a couple interesting things here, as I've pointed out in red and green. Notice in the first part of the letter, highlighted in red, he uses the word team 3 times. And in the second part of the letter, highlighted in green, he uses the word line 4 times. And this implies that there are 2 messages to be decoded here, one in the red part and one in the green part. And so now what I want to do is I want to turn to the movie to see if we have any clues or anything to work with as to how to decode this message. The first clue has to do with horned animals. Recall that horned animals is a facet of the Rothchild family crest. And in fact, this Rothchild family crest explicitly has a unicorn on it, as you can see here. Now, obviously, unicorns don't exist in real life. However, in this scene that we see Dick Halloran, he's talking to the forest ranger on the phone. In the background, you can see a horned animal. And when you think about this image here, Kubrick set it up so we're seeing this animal from the side. We're seeing its profile. The result being that we only see one of its horns, so that it looks like a unicorn. I believe this is a way for Kubrick to reference the unicorn that we see on the Rothschild family crest. Moving on to the second clue I want to go over has to do with the word assholes. When Dick Halloran is in the Denver airport and he's speaking to the mechanic Durkin, he uses this word, and as we shall see, I believe this is a way for Kubrick to help us in decoding Scatman's message in Playgirl. The next clue I want to go into has to do with the word team. Remember that this word is repeated 3 times in this paragraph we're analyzing right now. And one thing to keep in mind is that the letters in the word team can be rearranged into the word meet. And I believe this is significant because it was in this cold room scene here where Halloran directed us to page 193. He did so while literally surrounded by a room full of frozen dead meat. And related to this is the last clue I want to get into. Remember, it was Halloran who directed us again to page 193, where we decoded 2 messages there from Frank Lloyd Wright in his autobiography. And those 2 messages are here. And these messages are from parts 1 and 2 of Frank Lloyd Wright and the Taliesin Massacre in Kubrick's The Shining. So you can visit that series if you want. So I think it's reasonable to speculate that whatever Scatman has to say in his hidden message here that we're going to be looking at, he is probably going to refer to these 2 messages here. So those are the clues that are relevant to this situation here. And as you can see, I've broken down the first part of this message that we're looking at into letter frequency. Those are the numbers in blue. That tells us the frequency with which each letter of the alphabet appears in this particular paragraph. And so now, as is always the case, we need to rearrange these letters into the message Scatman wants us to see. So I went through that process, and this is the result. The first thing I want to point out is the numbers in red match the numbers in blue. That's always essential. And I want to point out the initials there, MBC. That refers to Mamie Borthwick Cheney. She was Frank Lloyd Wright's love interest at the time. She and her 2 children from a previous marriage were killed during the Taliesin Massacre. Now, if you want to pause and reflect on this message, you can. I will return to it soon. What I want to do is move on to the next message, the second part of Scatman's letter, and analyze that and decode that message. So, as I pointed out before, in this section of Scatman's letter, the word line appears 4 times. And what this implies to me is that what Scatman is going to do in his hidden message is he's going to refer to specific lines of Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography on page 193. Recall that the two messages that we decoded from that page came from lines 1 through 6 on page 193. So with these things in mind, and in mind also everything else that we're dealing with here, this is the second part of the message which I have come up with. And again, the letters in red match the letters in blue. As you can see there, Scatman does refer to lines 1, 2, and 3, and lines 4, 5, and 6. And what I want to do at this point is I want to juxtapose Scatman's message, both parts, with Frank Lloyd Wright's message, and I'm going to do that here coming up. However, before I do that, what I want to do is combine both parts of Scatman's message, which we have decoded today. And you can see that I've simply combined the entire letter from Scatman Crothers here into one message. And also note I've highlighted certain elements of this message in red and green, and you'll see why when I show you this next slide. So now the time has come to compare this total message from Crothers with the two messages we have from page 193 of Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography. You can see there up at the top are the two messages from Frank Lloyd Wright, and the bottom is from Scatman. And I've highlighted various phrases here in red and green because I believe they really drive home the point of how Scatman's message dovetails with Frank Lloyd Wright. For example, he uses the term Leo, Nathaniel Charles Rothchild. In the upper right, you can see Frank Lloyd Wright does the same sort of thing. Scatman also uses the word twins, and so on and so forth. And I think it's very striking that that this message really dovetails very well with Frank Lloyd Wright's messages. And also take note of that line there down at the very bottom in red. The N, nota bene, FYI, you need to use the N. Recall from part 2 of Frank Lloyd Wright and the Taliesin Massacre, we had to use the N that Frank Lloyd Wright inserted in the bottom left of page 193. I could spend a lot more time pointing out the similarities and internal consistencies here between these messages, but instead what I want to do is I want to examine another aspect to this section of the letter section in Playgirl magazine. And by that I'm referring to the block of italicized text underneath the letter that I've outlined in blue. You can see there that this is ostensibly some comments or remarks from the editors of Playgirl magazine. However, given what we've seen so far here in this issue of Playgirl, I think it's reasonable to look at this text here and wonder if there isn't also a hidden message here. What I'm getting at here is this: if multiple people associated with The Shining are writing letters containing hidden messages to this letter section in Playgirl magazine, then these little editorial italicized blocks would be a good opportunity for Kubrick to sort of jump in and give background and context to what the other people are saying. As the ringleader of this effort, it would be a good way for him to sort of guide us and offer us hints and clues as to how to interpret what's going on. So with that, what I want to do is I want to put this particular block of text under a microscope and examine it and try to see if there's any sort of hidden message in here we can come up with. So I went through that exercise, and as you have probably guessed, I found that yes, this is a message from Stanley Kubrick. As you can see here, what Kubrick is doing is he's essentially giving us some background as to how he gotten involved with the Apollo Moon Ruse, or Apollo Moon Hoax project. He calls it the Apollo Moon Ruse. And this dovetails, I think, fairly well with other messages we've seen, especially from Christiane and Vivian. So what I want to do is I want to put this message together with the other messages that we've seen to illustrate how this message fits in within the grand scheme of things. And to refresh your memory, here are the other messages that I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put Scatman's message side by side with Kubrick's message, and along with these messages. And so that's what I'm doing here. On the upper left is Scatman's message, on the upper right is Kubrick's, and underneath are the other messages that we've seen. And what I've done on those messages at the bottom there is I've underlined aspects of those messages which dovetail with the two messages we have up there at the top. Now, there's a lot going on here, and you can look at it at your leisure. The one thing I do want to focus on at this point is the message, the two messages there on the far right, Kubrick's message, and directly below his, the one from Christiane and Vivian. What we see there is we get an idea of how is it that Kubrick became involved in the Apollo Moon Hoax program. We can now know unequivocally that basically he was forced to do it. The Rothschilds forced Kubrick to help NASA fake the Apollo moon landing. And we also get an insight as to why Kubrick is so interested or determined to reveal to us the truth behind the Taliesin Massacre, because the same people, the same assholes, as he called them, the Rothschilds, who were responsible for what happened at Taliesin, are the same assholes who threatened him and his family, who terrorized him into and bullied him into taking part in the Apollo moon hoax. One last thing I want to focus on, and that is this statement here that Kubrick makes in his message. I think this is a pretty important thing to understand. Essentially what Kubrick is saying is that the United States is a plutocracy, and the plutocrats who rule over us are the Rothschilds. Now, as I pointed out in part 3 of Kubrick's Catcher in the Rye Code, Kubrick makes a similar statement visually. In Stuart Ullman's office, we see directly behind and slightly above him a dark-colored eagle. And you have to keep in mind that a sable eagle is one of the facets of the Rothschild family crest. So by placing the American flag there on the desk and having Stuart Ullman dressed in red, white, and blue, while behind him is a facet of the Rothschild family crest, Kubrick is telling us here visually that the Rothschilds are the ultimate authority of America. They are the ultimate rulers of our country. They are the plutocrats, in other words. Now, we normally don't think of The Shining as being a politically a movie making political statements, but I think this is worth thinking about. I think this is something that Kubrick was concerned about, and I think we should be concerned about it, because these Rothschilds, they're in charge. So with that, that's all I have for this video installment. Before I go, I want to point out something that I'm going to be doing at the end of every new video that I put out regarding The Shining. This whole effort has turned out to be something a lot more elaborate and complex than I thought it would be when I first started doing it. When I first started doing this, I thought this might be 1 or 2 messages or something like that, but this whole thing that Kubrick has done with The Shining is like this enormous onion with an infinite amount of layers to peel away. So what I'm going to do here at the end of every video is I'm going to put up an index of all the videos that I'm doing regarding this effort. And I'm just going to flash up a description of each video series, and you can pause and read it if there's something there that you want to look into later. And so that's all there is for today. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.